And so the reign of Richard III, 1483 to 85. Now I'm nervous about doing this. I've done many a controversial topic. Now of all the radio shows that I've done, the lessons that I've taught, I've never received more complaints about anything than the reign of Richard III. Words fail me at times. But let's begin the reign of Richard III, and I'll just have to deal with the barrage of complaints that will come from one side or the other. Now, Richard III tried to distance himself from the reign of his brother. He forced his brother's mistress to do penance as a whore. He then patronised Henry VI's foundations at King's College, Cambridge, and led a campaign for moral rearmament. Now, he then put the two princes, the children of his brother, into the Tower. There were rumours that he poisoned his wife and planned to marry his own niece. In 1485, the French Civil War ended. Now, this meant that the French had a lot of unemployed soldiers that were clearly going to cause trouble in the countryside, and so they decided to make sure they caused trouble elsewhere. And so troops and a fleet were given to Henry Tudor instead of being demobilised and allowed to cause trouble in France. In June, Richard III made his headquarters to deal with this invasion threat of the Tudors at Nottingham. In August, Henry VII, or Henry Tudor, landed at Milford Haven. In confusion and haste, Richard III doesn't call up all the available forces and troops that would have been available to him to resist this invasion. Many messages appear not to have been delivered. The city of York offered troops to Richard III, but Richard III didn't reply. He may not have got the message. But in his haste, he rushes to deal with this Tudor invasion. And on the 22nd of August is the Battle of Bosworth. Due to confusion in camp, Richard III's army forgot to do the traditional pre-battle mass, which unsettled many of the troops. It was later interpreted as an ill omen. When Richard III, however, spied Henry VII across the battlefield. Now, Richard III was a man of great personal bravery and had proven himself to be a good soldier. He spied Henry Tudor across the battlefield and charged across the battlefield to try and face him face to face. In a great chivalric moment, Henry III hoped to cut Henry Tudor down personally. But it really wasn't necessary. The battle had only just begun, and he certainly had not lost it. In fact, far from it. He had the high ground, he had the larger of the two armies, and many of his own followers had yet to reach the battlefield. His charge to try and fight Henry VII personally was incredibly brave, but incredibly foolish. Critically, Northumberland, who had been on Richard III's side, had at this stage failed to engage. He had a large force of archers and billmen. Had he attacked, Richard III would almost certainly have won the Battle of Bosworth, as Richard III has the advantage of both land and numbers. Many suspected Northumberland of treachery, like the Stanley family, who did change sides and betrayed Richard III. And, as we said, Northumberland was killed in the tax revolt that soon followed by his own followers, who had been disgusted at his failure to back Richard III at that critical moment. Yet, it has to be said, Northumberland was personally captured at the Battle of Bosworth, and certainly Northumberland claimed that Richard III simply didn't give him time for him and his troops to attack the forces of Henry Tudor. But ultimately, Richard III would be the only one of the four usurpers to fail in the 15th century. Richard III's government had a number of weaknesses. He had relied far too much on the Northerners in his government. He had failed to win the confidence of his subjects. But he had done a number of positive points. He had pioneered the Court of Poor Requests, an important legal channel for the less advantaged to seek legal redress. He had reaffirmed that only Parliament could levy taxation. He had tightened up financial management of the realm. He had established the Council of the North, and it might well be that his government simply had lacked time to be able to properly embed itself. Certainly, Richard III had proven himself to be a man of ability and energy. He divided contemporaries, and he also divides modern opinion. He has, even now as then, some incredibly devoted followers. Others are repulsed by what they see as personal ambition. Shakespeare's portrayal of him, of course, is as a blood-soaked megalomaniac tyrant. You can read the historical record either way, which is probably why I get so many complaints. People want me to either say that he was a saint or that he was damned. He could be, I'm afraid he could be either. And I wasn't alive then, I didn't met him. We can only judge it from the historical record. So he has some devoted followers, others are repulsed. He certainly had all the virtues of the age. He was a great figure of chivalry. He was a benefactor of the church. He was an enforcer of the law. Had he come to the throne by normal succession, then he could probably have been a great success as a king. He seems to have had all of the requirements to be a great king. But by taking the throne forcibly from his brother's children, he had failed to live up to his own high ideals. He was the House of York's Henry V, in that he was a man of great faith and wanted to be a great leader in war. But there perhaps is the critical difference between the houses of York and Lancaster. Henry VII would come to the throne after the Battle of Bosworth, with Richard dead. It wouldn't be the end of the War of the Roses. There is, as many of you have seen, if you saw the Nottingham Mystery, there is one last battle of the War of the Roses 2 years later, bigger than Bosworth in terms of numbers of people who took part, as the Yorkists would have one last effort to try and take back control through the pretender Lambert Simnel, supported by Lincoln, an effort that would go down to defeat at the Battle of East Stoke, just north of Nottingham. But the War of the Roses was over. The Tudor dynasty were now the last ones left standing. Whether they had a genuine claim to the throne or not, remember, they could be Beauforts though. Maybe we were ruled by the Beaufort dynasty. But Henry VII would take control, and he would start to reduce the power of overmighty subjects, and he would successfully pass the throne on to his son, who would then, of course, Henry VIII, pass on the crown to all his children, one after the other. Thank you very much. I hope you're all keeping safe during lockdown, and I will speak to you all at the next episode of House Histories.